Lord of the Mysteries audiobook by Kevin 12717 lights. Upon hearing Indigo Light Isis's reply, Klein's mind tensed up as he recalled the crimson moon, the brown planet, the scarlet planet, the blue planet and gold planet. He felt like they were looking down at him from above with their eyes. Silently, a connection was established. The impending fatal corruption made all of Klein's worms of spirit feel uneasy. As an angel in control of Sephra Castle, Klein had many ways to sever this connection. Firstly, he could use the status and strength of a complete mythical creature. Secondly, he could suppress his anchors, using the mental imprint the primordial one left in him to offset it. Thirdly, he could use the aura of Sephra Castle that he could now utilize one step further. Without any hesitation, he chose the simplest and most convenient method to not leave behind any hidden dangers. A grayish-white fog appeared around him as all the celestial body projections in his mind vanished. After being stunned for a second, Klein organized his words and said, "There are that many outer deities." Indigo Light Isis symbolized the domain of prayers. He touched the ruby ring on his right hand and nodded. Ever since the oldest one awakened and split apart, the most powerful outer deities in the entire universe gathered around this tiny solar system. Some of them wished to retrieve their Sephirot and characteristics that had been ripped from them, and were attracted here. Some of them have the hope of getting neighboring Sephirot and high-level characteristics which they can accommodate. Oldest one. The seven lights address the original creator as the oldest one, and not the primordial one in terms of the name's meaning. There isn't much difference. Klein deliberated and asked, Sephirot and characteristics that were ripped and attracted over. He could understand the rest of the words Indigo Light had mentioned, and he had even made some speculation towards such matters. There was just one point that caught him by surprise. Blue Light Cuthumi, who was a symbol of the domain of cogitation, and used love and wisdom as a characteristic of his body, explained kindly, "Your Excellency, you shouldn't be unfamiliar with the law of convergence of Beyonder characteristics." Seeing Klein nod, the thick-bearded elder with a sapphire tied around his forehead continued, "This isn't just a law for the sequence pathways. It's also suitable for describing the Sephirot and the characteristics related to the outer deities, especially the ones that were directly nurtured and created from the oldest one. For example, the mother goddess of depravity, son of chaos, and the mother tree of desire. As for the other outer deities, we aren't too sure. In short, the three great old ones who lost a portion of their Sephirot and characteristics are most concerned and proactive when it comes to invading the real world. They have been trying to influence the spirit world and corrupt us." Klein nodded slightly and asked in a confirmation-seeking tone, "In other words, a portion of the current 22 pathways and 9 Sephirot belong to the outer deities?" "Yes." The amethyst-wielding Saint Germain, who symbolized the domain of ritualistic magic, took the opportunity to answer. When the total number of 22 pathways and the 9 Sephirot was reached, everything finally reached a balance. This might be the mysticism connection that originated from the oldest one. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "What are they exactly, Saint Germain?" Whose face was suffused with a faint purple glow, making him look rather mysterious, said, "For example, the moon and the earth pathway both belong to the mother goddess of depravity. She is an existence that stands atop all the outer deities. Even after a portion of her Sephra, that is, the brood hive, was ripped from her, that remains the case. She is the sovereign of all the feminine forces in the entire universe." Just as Saint Germain said that, Green Light Serapis suddenly laughed. In fact, after carefully analyzing the 22 pathways, you'll discover that the moon and earth pathways are the two most contradictory ones. Heh heh. The demoness pathway represents the oldest one's feminine side. The red priest pathway represents the masculine side. This happens to form a deformed aspect of balance, but the moon and earth can also make beyonders of the corresponding pathways turn into feminine creatures at high sequences. There are no pathways that balance it. Seeing Klein wince his eyebrows, Green Light, who had the long hair of an artist, added with a smile, "The Earth Pathway Sequence 2 is Desolate Matriarch, and the Moon Pathway Sequence 1 is called Beauty Goddess. Therefore the Sanguine only have queens and no male princes. Then was the ancient goddess Lilith, originally a male and a female." Klein mumbled inwardly and asked thoughtfully, "The primordial moon is the mother goddess of depravity?" "Yes." Red Light Ayer Moria, who was wearing a diamond crown, nodded in a dignified manner. "She occupies the moon, and through her own level and influence on the brood hive and the uniqueness of two pathways, she has gradually infiltrated into reality. The primordial moon is her manifestation in this world." After saying that, Ayer Moria paused and said, "Her full title is Mother Goddess of Depravity, Origin of Evil, the Indestructible, and the Brood Hive of Filth." Klein recalled the exaggerated reaction of the moon when he first learned of the secret of the cosmos. He suddenly felt a chill as he hurriedly asked, "The devil and prisoner pathway come from the mother tree of desire?" Yellow Light Venithan, who was wearing a lemon-yellow robe, sighed. "Yes, her full name is the mother tree of desire, father to devils, perpetual blatherer, and the heartless god. Therefore, she had seized the opportunity when something happened to the chained god, easily achieving her goal of corruption. Mother, father, is that fellow a man or a woman? Yes, to an existence at this level, it's normal for there to be no distinction between genders. Different incarnations have different images, heh. She even wanted to bear a child for me. From the present state of the chained god, if I had been caught, I'd probably be the one bearing the child. Then the child will inherit Sephra Castle, allowing the mother tree of desire to indirectly corrupt and control this Sephra from this angle. Perhaps the prisoner pathway's desire of indulgence is the proper way of acting. However, this correct path leads to the outer deity, so temperance is still the better one." Klein frowned slightly as he raised a question he had guessed before, hoping to get an answer. "Since there are so many outer deities, why haven't they entered our world yet?" From what Klein had learned to date, he could guess that, even if it were only the mother goddess of depravity and the mother tree of desire, the outer deities could easily resolve existences like the former 7 deities, the true creator, and the primordial demoness. The plump orange Light Hilarion smiled and said, "All our suffering comes from the oldest one. All our luck comes from the oldest one as well." Not only did he leave behind his spirit, will, branding, and corruption, but he also left behind the Sephiroth characteristics and power. The remnants of his power formed an invisible barrier outside the planet, preventing the outer deities from directly invading it. However, with the passage of time, his consciousness and powers haven't truly been revived, and his will and powers are fading. At the end of the 4th epoch, this reached a very serious state. The invisible barrier produced cracks, and the 7 deities had no choice but to move their divine kingdoms into the astral world to mend the cracks. It's no wonder that the true deities from the 4th epoch could walk the land, but they rarely descended in the 5th epoch. Klein immediately came to a realization and asked, "When the oldest one's will and powers decline further, the invisible barrier will vanish and usher in the apocalypse?" Orange Light Hilarion, who had been smiling all this while, glanced at Yellow Light Venithan. His expression immediately turned serious. "Yes. When the time comes, the mother goddess of depravity, the mother tree of desire, and the son of chaos, and all the other outer deities would invade this planet. Even if the goddess becomes a great old one, she wouldn't be able to withstand so many of them. The other sequence 0 deities would be able to tie down 1 or 2 outer deities together, and that would be considered a miracle. It would take 9 to fight 1. Or even more. Klein's scalp tingled as he once again experienced the meaning of despair. No wonder it was called the apocalypse. With his upheaval in emotions, he immediately felt the primordial one's mental imprint strengthen, and more of it had eroded what the anchors had fixed in place. Klein quickly calmed himself down and allowed the fragile balance to reappear again. This is the reason why the corruption from underground will naturally dissipate as long as one doesn't approach it or resist. Klein recalled some of the mysticism knowledge he had previously grasped. Your Excellency, you're completely right. Orange Light Hilarion gave an affirmative answer. Klein immediately made other connections. Does that mean that the closer one is to the apocalypse, the easier it is for one to advance? This is because the primordial one's will is fading. His awakening will become difficult, to the point of not waking up again. Red Light, Ayer Moria thought for a moment and said, this is the reason why the 7 deities have only waited until recently to set their sights on above the sequences before taking concrete action. However, the oldest ones can dissipate, but his spirit will remain forever. It won't be erased unless the entire universe returns to the singularity. Therefore, the corresponding high-level existences still have the possibility of having the oldest one awaken in them. The higher the level, the greater the possibility. The corresponding influence and corruption will become more serious. The extraordinary power and the curse that can never be broken are always two sides of the same coin. Klein sighed. Forcefully suppressing a problem that wasn't at his level, he asked, do you know the potion formula for Attendant of Mysteries? The amethyst-wielding Saint Germain replied, there's a corresponding mystery attached to such knowledge. It's not in the spirit world, but according to our observations, the Attendant of Mysteries ritual should be closely related to the spirit world. Orange Light Hilarion immediately smiled at Klein. Your Excellency, if you require anything, we'll provide our full support. This fervor makes me a little afraid, just like facing arrows. Klein nodded slightly and prepared to change the topic. After some consideration, he asked solemnly, do you know of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings? He translated the title using Elvish. The 7 lights immediately fell silent. They looked at each other and didn't reply for a while. After a few seconds, Orange Light Hilarion sighed. We still can't be sure if you're him. He was a great old one who had been active during the end of the previous civilization up to the mid-stages of the first epoch. He is the great ruler above the spirit world that we speak of. The celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings is his title in the Western continent. The other title is King of Space-Time, Beacon of Destiny, Embodiment of Sephra Castle, Dominator of the spirit world. And at this point, Orange Light paused and said, Lord of the Mysteries. 1272, Spring. The King of Space-Time, Beacon of Destiny, Embodiment of Sephra Castle, Dominator of the spirit world, Lord of the Mysteries. So the mysteries mentioned by the ancient sun god refers to the Lord of the Mysteries. Klein silently repeated the titles as he felt the trauma in his heart increase. He immediately thought of a question and hesitated before saying, based on what I know, a long time before the last civilization ended, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings had already appeared. After the 7 lights exchanged looks, the thin yellow light Venithan, who was translucent like other spirit world creatures, sighed and said, we weren't aware of that. When the previous civilization came to an end, the 7 lights from before had been wiped out when the oldest one awoke. We were the pure lights that were born from the spirit world during the first epoch. However, we have some guesses about the great ruler above the spirit world. Perhaps this can answer your questions. Klein perked up and wore an attentive look. Yellow Light Venithan continued, we suspect that some of the great old ones that were active in the first epoch were outer deities who had been directly attracted to this planet. Some of them came alive as sephirots. In other words, some great old ones were equivalent to the oldest one embodiments of the different personalities he split into. Whatever separates will definitely converge, and whatever converges will definitely separate. This description isn't limited to beyonder characteristics, but also refers to the oldest one himself. As most of the Sephirot and characteristics are from this supreme existence, there are natural inclinations of convergence. And the oldest one is the amalgamation of all the contradictions in the universe. Once the Sephirot and characteristics are gathered, it will almost certainly separate. Is this the crux and origins of the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics? The genie is an unlucky outer deity who got attracted to this world, only to encounter the Lord of the Mysteries. Klein nodded slightly and didn't interrupt. He patiently waited for yellow light to share their guesses. Dressed in a lemon-yellow robe, Venithan glanced at Klein and said, "Perhaps the oldest one had already had an inclination towards separating while asleep. Therefore, his mind was split into different parts. He used different titles to secretly interfere with the real world and prepare for the separation that was bound to happen once his body woke up. For example, God Almighty or the Celestial Worthy. A reasonable guess. It can explain many of my doubts." Klein immediately felt enlightened. He deliberated and said, "In other words, you believe that the great ruler above the spirit world was a part of the oldest one. To a certain extent, he is equivalent to the oldest one." "That's right." Orange Light Hilarion gave an affirmative response before comforting Klein. "Based on the present situation, the great ruler is also the same as the rest of the oldest one. His will and powers have faded over time. Your Excellency, regardless of you being him or not, it doesn't hinder you from putting up a certain level of resistance. Keep what's left of your humanity and reach a particular balance with him. Heh heh, separation is inevitable. What kind of consolation is that?" Klein couldn't help but lampoon. Then he realized a problem. Since the oldest one dissociated into different parts, the mental imprint in the body of a high-sequence beyonder of the corresponding pathway should also belong to the different great old ones. If the primordial one which awoke in the ancient sun god's body is the God Almighty as described by the seven lights, then who would it be when the primordial one's mental imprint begins eating at me? The answer to this question was very obvious. Without needing to think, Klein could answer it. The Lord of the Mysteries, the dominator of the spirit world, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. In other words, it wasn't that the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings hadn't left any traces as he had previously believed. He had already awoken in Klein's body. FCK. Klein's entire body turned cold. He inexplicably experienced what the ancient sun god previously felt. At that moment, he was very worried that one day he would unknowingly become another person, becoming the resurrected Lord of the Mysteries, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. However, an awakening of this level is similar to what other angels have encountered. It's not as strong and irresistible as I had imagined it to be. This is because I'm different from the ancient sun god. I wasn't born with the status of an angel, or even in control of a uniqueness. I advanced step by step, and I was able to complete the digestion in different stages. If that's the case, I have to thank the grayish-white fog that sent the curtain into the forsaken land of the gods. Perhaps this involved the help of a particular or several existences. Yes, that's still not right. I've already become the owner of Sephra Castle. There's no reason for the corruption and contamination I suffer to be the same as other Sequence 2 angels. Klein secretly shook his head. He didn't raise the corresponding question to the seven lights. To him, this was one of his core secrets. He definitely couldn't let other existences know what his current state was like. He raised his right hand and placed it to his mouth. He coughed lightly. "I roughly understand." After chatting with the seven lights, Klein stood up and bowed. Thank you for your answers. It was our pleasure. May your excellency return to the throne of the great ruler above the spirit world as quickly as possible. The 7 lights stood up at the same time, giving him a warm response. Are they trying to curse me? Klein teased himself as he politely sent away the 7 pure lights. Following that, he activated teleport once again and returned to a secluded alley in Backlund. Pressing his top hat on his head, Klein strolled down the street. The first thing that caught his eye was the crowd of all kinds of people and the hustle and bustle that formed a heat wave. Some people were wearing linen clothes, sawing down abnormally tall trees in groups of about 4 people. Some of them formed a team, busy repairing the streets and houses that didn't suffer too much damage. Some held daisy pies and sweet iced tea in their hands, rushing past him as though they were rushing to their workplace. Some of them rode cargo carriages, carrying food, meat, and vegetables, all heading in different directions. Although most of these people wore simple clothes with plenty of visible stitches, and there were still signs of numbness and pain on their faces, the vitality their bodies exuded seemed to interweave into a light of hope before Klein's eyes. They were tenaciously brimming with life. They were like grass that tried their best to tear through stones after a cold winter. Klein slowed down his steps and gazed deeply at the bustling scene. Although he hadn't seen the tragedy in the later stages of the war, he had learned plenty from Miss Justice and Leonard. Furthermore, he had previously been traveling in the even darker and more repressed forsaken land of the gods. It was inevitable that he felt some uncontrollable emotions. Spring had arrived. Klein's expression gradually relaxed as the corners of his mouth curled up. He walked through the streets and alleys that were rebuilt after the war, and he walked all the way to St. Samuel Cathedral in Northborough. The square was filled with potholes, and walked past Leonard. When he reached the door, Leonard slowly got up and followed behind. One after the other, they arrived at a corner of the square not long after. Leonard looked at the few pigeons on the ground and seemingly mumbled to himself, "I'm already a high-ranking deacon of the Nighthawks. In another 2 days, I'll return to the Holy Cathedral for some studies, as well as obtain a corresponding holy artifact." In the final stages of the war, he advanced at the front lines to sequence 4 Night Watcher. "You don't seem to be too happy." Klein, who was standing beside Leonard, didn't turn his head as he looked at the pigeons. Leonard laughed self-deprecatingly. "I have no right to be unhappy. I was just thinking that the Battle of Gods ended so quickly, and the result was unexpected. Does it mean that the previous defeat and the difficulties that everyone suffered were nothing but bait? Before today, I shared your views. I was also puzzled and frustrated, but now I'm a little lost. This might have been a necessity." Klein didn't hide his feelings. Leonard fell silent for 2 seconds before looking down at the pigeon that was prancing around him. "That's what old man said too." Without waiting for Klein to say another word, he turned his head and glanced at his former colleague. "You've become an angel." Pallas Zarost had told him that what Klein had done previously was perhaps to prepare for his advancement to an angel. "Yes," Klein nodded slightly, "but there isn't any glory or power in this. Only pain, curses, and responsibility." "Why?" Leonard subconsciously asked. Klein didn't reply immediately. He looked down at the shadow by his feet and turned to walk out the square. After a few steps, he turned his back to Leonard and muttered to himself, "You should still remember that sentence. We are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness." Leonard was taken aback. After a few seconds, he turned to look at Klein, but all he could see was Klein's back, which was just about to disappear around the corner of the street. He was wearing a half-top hat and a black trench coat. With a whoosh, the pigeons on the ground flew up into the light blue sky. 1273, the poor arrow's Klein didn't visit Benson and Melissa because the matters he was involved in were at too high a level. Approaching his siblings would only bring them disaster. For existences who didn't know Klein's original identity, such acts would help them understand the relationship between Benson, Melissa, and Klein. To know of Klein's past experiences, this would make them confirm one thing: Klein still maintained his humanity and was still very concerned about his family. Therefore, staying away from Benson and Melissa was the best form of protection he could give them. Of course, Klein had already grasped the situation of his siblings through Miss Justice. During the war, Benson had displayed his experience and ability at the Ministry of Finance. He received many promotions and had become the deputy director of the 5th Department, and his annual salary reached £300. Melissa won the favor of her mentor, Portland Moment, and was given a chance to become a Beyonder. The chancellor of the Backlund University of Technology was a believer of the god of steam and machinery, so he had long become a Beyonder. He was currently a Sequence 7 appraiser. He wished for Melissa to become a Sequence 9 savant so that she could better absorb the knowledge and improve her memory. This established a good foundation for her in her subsequent development in the mechanical domain. This was Melissa's secret, but she wasn't able to hide from a spectator at the demigod level. Besides, Audrey definitely informed Klein that Melissa was more inclined to agree and would be making a decision in the next few days. Klein's attitude towards this matter was a tacit acquiesce. On the one hand, the spiritual perception enhancement one gained from the savant pathway's advancement was rather limited. Melissa wouldn't really hear or see what she shouldn't. On the other hand, with the impending apocalypse, the madness caused by the low sequence potions would further decrease. Furthermore, there was also him, a miracle invoker, to help lower the risk of her losing control. For an avid fan of machinery, a Sequence 9 savant is enough. Moment shares the same attitude. He doesn't wish for a believer of the Evernight to obtain too many potions from the Church of Steam. Yes, the apocalypse is approaching, and the invisible barrier is weakening. The intrusion of this world by the outer deities will become more and more obvious. The chances of ordinary people encountering Beyonder incidents will definitely gradually increase. From this point of view, it's also a good thing for Melissa to become a Beyonder. If she can successfully advance to Sequence 6 artisan or a machinery specialist, then she can fulfill her dreams and protect herself and Benson. I'll get Miss Justice to find an opportunity to disclose the acting method to Melissa in a discreet manner. The extent of her future growth will depend on her. At most, I can give her some good luck, formulas and ingredients. I'm really like an older brother who can't rest easily. I've been like this since the beginning. Does this count as granting a wish in a certain sense? Wait, Melissa definitely wishes for Klein to come back to life. If I were to walk right in front of her, would I receive enough feedback? Forget it. This will bring her and Benson a devastating disaster. Klein shook his head and stopped himself from making excuses. He then pressed down on his top hat and turned towards a hotel by the streets. He took out a gold pound and got a room. The gold pound was real. It was an item that Klein had brought back to the real world some time ago. In the previous war, Klein had donated £14,800 in cash, £14,200 worth of gold bars, and nearly 20 high-quality gems through Miss Justice. Apart from all the strange items left on the junk pile, he only had 39 lone gold coins and 10 high-quality gems left. Glancing at the hotel owner's returning change in solely and pennies, Klein put them away and entered the room before walking to the full-length mirror. Right on the heels of that, he took out a pen and paper and drew the incantation that summoned arrows. Seconds and minutes passed, but nothing abnormal happened. The full-body mirror remained silent. A few seconds later, Klein chuckled and raised his eyebrows. He took out a gold coin from his pocket. Chug, chug, chug. A steam locomotive that was spewing thick smoke tore across the rail, heading west of the continent. The disheveled Icancer and a machinery hive mind member stood in a particular carriage as they focused on the metal cage in front of them. The metal spikes above the cage extended outwards in all kinds of menacing ways, coruscating with a dim light. The machinery hive mind member, who had the looks of a typical Lonese citizen, looked out the window at the planes rapidly sweeping past them. He couldn't help but ask, "Deacon, are you planning on returning to Lone after reaching Intes?" After the war ended, the Church of Steam, who had taken the wrong side, had no choice but to bear the consequences of its actions. It had to transfer all Beyonders above that of demigods, and sealed artifacts above grade 2 out of Lone within a time period set by the two churches of Evernight and Storm. In other words, they had lost their original status. In the future, they could only maintain a small number of cathedrals, just like the Church of Earth Mother in Lone. If it weren't for the fact that there were too many people who believed in the god of steam and machinery, and some of them being key figures in the reconstruction efforts after the war, the Church of Steam might not have been able to retain such treatment. Similarly, a smaller number of cathedrals only required a small number of machinery hive mind members. Most of the Beyonders in Lone had to migrate to Intes. Icancer fell silent for a few seconds before smiling bitterly. "I have to heed the Archbishop's arrangements, but I will take the initiative to request a return to Lone. That's where my childhood, teenage, and young adult life was. There are too many memories that I can't forget." As he spoke, his gaze grew distant, and he seemed to see the capital of capitals. At this moment, the metal cage that was overgrown with spikes suddenly trembled. Silver bolts of lightning appeared out of nowhere and landed one after another. They were all absorbed by the metal cage, and through a few wires wrapped in rubber, the current flowed to the ground outside the steam locomotive, dragging out a line of sparks. Bang, bang, bang. The metal cage seemed to be hit by an invisible hand, but it was unable to break the barrier. The magic mirror's reaction is very intense. It's always been very quiet in the past. The machinery hive mind member who had been asking was rather puzzled. Amidst the banging, Icancer subconsciously touched his hair. "That's not the case. It will sometimes show its crazy side. If it wasn't for what had happened, we would have still treated it as a grade 2 sealed artifact." "Is that so?" "Heh heh, I haven't come into contact with it before, so it might just be me, but it feels to me that the magic mirror doesn't want to leave Backlund." The machinery hive mind member teased with a smile. "Pa, lightning struck and was absorbed by the metal cage. Bang, bang, bang." The slamming sounds dragged on slowly as though it was making its last helpless cry. Icancer took out an old and exquisite pocket watch and opened it. "It only lasted 2 minutes. It's much better than in the morning." Just as the member of the machinery hive mind who had just been transferred over was about to ask, he suddenly heard the slamming sound stop abruptly. It was as though it had been affected by some factor that it couldn't put up resistance to. "This is the style of the magic mirror?" he asked. Icancer frowned slightly and said, "No. Normally speaking, it wouldn't have the strength to last 20 to 30 seconds. Something's wrong. Deacon, don't worry. There is a powerful figure on board the train, one who outranks the archbishops." The machinery hive mind member beside him consoled him indifferently. There were too many dangerous sealed artifacts on the steam locomotive. Without a powerful figure watching them, there would definitely be problems. Icancer nodded, indicating that he wasn't worried. Klein was sitting in a conjured carriage in a hamlet's path more than 10 kilometers away from the steam locomotive. In front of him was a mirror. Just as he finished outlining the symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying, a wave of light suffused the mirror as golden Lonese text appeared. "Exalted Great Master, you're finally here. Your puny, loyal, and poor servant Arrodes misses you." Klein couldn't accept the enthusiasm behind this line as he shrank back indiscernibly. If Arrodes's previous attempts to curry favor still maintained a hint of dignity, it was now complete fawning over him. Klein could even detect a hint of crying. The frequency of amorous news popping up in Trier is far higher than in Backlund. It should be a place that you're fond of, Klein teased Arrodes with a smile. That's because you don't wish to go to Trier. The golden words on the surface of the mirror faded their colors, turning a faint silver. Klein secretly clicked his tongue. I have something to ask you. Please ask, Arrodes replied humbly. Do you know who Earth Mother is? Klein went straight to the point. The mirror instantly turned dark as the faint silver words turned palish white. I don't know, but during the War of Gods, I heard a voice coming from deep within tenebrous heaven. He shouted a name that's the true name of the sanguine ancestor. This magic mirror didn't dare to directly present Lilith's name. Lilith. It's actually Lilith. Klein was surprised, but he also felt that this answered many of his questions. Then he thought of the moon Emlyn. This vampire kept going in circles, imagining all kinds of developments, only to have never changed his faith. If Emlyn had Anderson's personality, he would definitely say to the Sanguine's Grand Duke and Marquises, "Hey, are you also coming to believe in the Mother Goddess?" As Klein imagined the funny scene, he said to Arrodes, "It's your turn to ask." "Supreme Master, please continue asking. I'll ask it all at once towards the end." The palish white words regained their faint silver luster. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "How's the situation like now? For example, the situation in Fasak." 1274, the stabilization of the situation on the surface of the mirror. Silver words surfaced one by one amidst the aqueous light. Adopt Beyonders from the Church of the God of Combat and the Fasak military who are willing to pledge their loyalty. Only the extremely pious, faithful, and those willing to be martyrs, as well as a few mid and upper echelon members of the church, are to be eliminated. This is both the benevolence and compassion of the goddess, as well as the necessary measures to deal with the subsequent situation. With the apocalypse approaching, the number of Beyonder incidents will inevitably increase all across the world. To maintain the stability of the world, we have to do our best to increase our strength as quickly as possible. If we were to call the Beyonders of the Church of the God of Combat and the Fasak military, obtaining their corresponding characteristics, that still doesn't aid us in nurturing a Beyonder of the same level within a few years. A Beyonder with rich experience, be it in their digesting of the potion or accumulated knowledge, requires a sufficient amount of time. Upon seeing this, Klein mumbled inwardly. He felt that this wasn't the usual tone of Arrodes. It was more like an official document. It's showing documents of unknown origins that it peeped at by using words like digesting. It means that both the writer and the reader have mastered the acting method. And from the tone of the document, it's from the Church of Evernight. Based on these 2 points, it's not difficult to tell that these documents are for the eyes of archbishops and high-ranking deacons. The author should be the Apostolic See from the Cathedral of Serenity. Arrodes's secret prying abilities are very impressive. Klein nodded indiscernibly as he waited for the contents in the mirror to flip the page. The silver words vanished one after another, quickly forming new sentences and paragraphs. There's no need to spread the fact that the goddess has replaced the god of combat to the ordinary nobles and citizens of Fasak. This allows them to retain their faith in the god of combat. On the one hand, it's beneficial for us and the priests, bishops, and various major cathedrals who have surrendered to us. It will stabilize the situation in Fasak in the quickest way possible. On the other hand, it also prevents the goddess from being disturbed by the unresolvable problem of faith before she completely gains control of the god of combat's authority. An update will be disseminated after a new revelation is given. Now, we will only draw up the corresponding draft. And try not to incite the strong resistance of Fasak and other countries. We've lost too many Beyonders and soldiers, and we have expended a large amount of resources and items. Be it the church, the countries, or the people of different classes, we are all very weak. We need some time of peace and stability to recover. We should work with the Church of Storms, the Church of Knowledge, the Church of Earth Mother, countries like Fainapotter or Lenberg. We will force Intis and Fasak to make an unconditional surrender. We will obtain what we hope for at the negotiation table. During this process, we can use the purging of the stubborn, old-fashioned faithful to exert pressure on them. When dealing with the domestic situation and the filling of the void left behind by the Church of Steam, the Church of Storm should be given enough respect. We can even make concessions on certain matters. This is the will of the goddess. Finally, from this moment forth, the number of times the crimson moon that appears in the sermons, preaching, rituals, and masses should be reduced. In official canon, the goddess's title of Lady of Crimson shall no longer be mentioned. Lady of Crimson shall no longer be mentioned. Klein's brows twitched as he felt a strong sense of confusion towards the last sentence. Soon, he thought of the sanguine ancestor, the ancient god of the second epoch, and the present Earth Mother Lilith, who was once a sequence 0 of the moon pathway. She was the true Lady of Crimson. In a moment of enlightenment, he vaguely understood that this might be an exchange under the table. It was a necessary price. Yes, the goddess's attitude is very clear. That is to stabilize the situation as quickly as possible before she truly controls the authority of death and that of the god of combat and becomes a great old one. She undoubtedly doesn't wish for any more orthodox deities to perish. If that happened, the invisible barrier left behind by the primordial one will have no one to mend it. This will allow the outer deities to find an opportunity to bring the apocalypse forward. Also, based on Lone's present situation, if we continue the war, the anchors will waver even more. It might lead to the awakening of the primordial one in the goddess. The goddess took a huge risk having the frontline retreat all the way to Backlund. She had to divert more strength to suppress the primordial one. If Earth Mother betrayed her, she might have perished even faster than the god of combat. Could she have other trump cards? The losses that the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of Storms suffered seems quite significant. It's no wonder that after the resistance announced that they would retain the corresponding cathedrals and respect the Storm religion, that bunch of irascible fellows didn't attempt to retaliate, and they silently agreed to the establishment of the new government. Klein mumbled to himself as he had a rough idea of the current situation. He asked a third question. If the Evernight Goddess wants to advance further, does she need to find the river of eternal darkness? This was one of the 9 Sephiroth. Klein remembered Arod's mentioning it once, saying that this river was related to the ancient death, the phoenix ancestor Gregres. The clues seemed to be hidden deep in the spirit world's Calderon city. Yes, Great Master. The silver words twisted and distorted, forming new text. The death at the end of the 4th epoch should have been able to use the river of eternal darkness. He attempted to use this Sephra to forcefully accommodate the uniqueness of neighboring pathways. Then he went mad. So that was how death went mad back then. I knew it. A sequence 0 true god, one who has lived for 3 epochs and has seen the blasphemy slate, wouldn't lack common sense and randomly drink potions. It's not like he is Alice the Tutor, having reached a point of only having the options of madness or death. It's no wonder death challenged the fractured 7 deities with just a primordial demoness. Back then, he was equivalent to half a great old one. Yes, Mr. Azek had a golden phoenix accessory that came from death. Klein strung up certain matters. Suddenly, he inwardly let out an exclamation. He suspected that the price of so many bestowments was the river of eternal darkness. Just like how the true creator had repeatedly tolerated him so as to force him into the giant king's residence to obtain the first blasphemy slate. As the owner of Sephra Castle, he was probably the only relatively high sequence beyonder who could resist the corruption of other Sephiroth. Of course, the Evernight goddess could also wait up to a decade or so. After the primordial ones will faded further, she could personally retrieve it. However, this way, Klein wasn't sure if she could complete the ritual before the apocalypse happened. He composed himself and raised the fourth question. Where can I get the potion formula for Attendant of Mysteries? Arrows made the silver words reassemble into brand new content. Zeratul, first blasphemy slate, second blasphemy slate, the card of blasphemy, the fool uniqueness that has become a mythical creature. The first choice and second choice might be plotting against me. Zeratul is even more terrifying and cunning than the dark demonic wolf. If I were to plot against him, there's a high chance of me falling into his trap. The danger is extremely high. The third choice is Ammon's brother. He should have used this war to become a visionary. If I were to provoke him, Sephra Castle might not be able to save me. The fourth and fifth options are related to the half-fool of the Antigonus family. It's related to the goddess's foggy town. The goddess should have a way to circle around the half-fool and extract the card of blasphemy, but perhaps I'll need to use the river of eternal darkness to exchange for it. Klein realized that he had reached a dead end. The path ahead was the river of eternal darkness, and behind him was the leader of the secret order, Zeratul. Unfortunately, if I can find the dark demonic wolf, I can try to negotiate with him. He should have seen the first blasphemy slate and grasped the potion formula of Attendant of Mysteries. He will flee far away once he smells me. Klein thought for a moment and said to Arrows, fifth question, what did you mean when you said you saw a pillar and support from me? The aqueous light in the mirror swirled slightly as the deepness became more obvious. The corresponding silver text seemed to turn a little whiter. Great Master, this is a feeling that I can't describe using words. However, I've experienced similar feelings in another existence before. Apart from him, only you possess it. That existence is the ancient sun god. The ancient sun god, Klein nodded in thought. All right, it's your turn to ask. On the surface of the mirror, the words on the silver screen suddenly turned golden. Supreme Master, do you think you can take away your loyal and humble servant Arrows? Supreme Master, do you think you can take away your loyal and humble servant Arrows? This question appeared 5 times in a row, completely covering the surface of the mirror. Having become an angel, Klein no longer feared Arrows. After thinking for a few seconds, he smiled and said, "Let me talk to that angel. This is basic courtesy." With a boom, illusory beams of different colors spewed out from the mirror and exploded into fireworks in the carriage. Almost at the same time, 2 dark rays of light reached out from the edge of the mirror. 2 arms that appeared surreal grew out. The 2 arms originally wanted to reach out to Klein's calf, but they silently shrank back and gently swayed on the spot. Praise the Supreme Master. After the fireworks fell, a golden message appeared in the mirror. In the middle section of the steam locomotive, in a simple room, a tall and handsome young man with long chestnut hair sat on a hardwood chair. Facing the triangular sacred emblem, he clasped his hands and closed his eyes as he sincerely prayed. On the side of the narrow table was a mannequin made of metal components. Behind the mannequin was a faint meshed glow. Suddenly, the young man opened his eyes and looked towards the other side. Someone had appeared there, and in the young man's blue eyes the figure only looked like a person. In essence, it was an invisible vortex wearing a silk top hat and a black trench coat. Inside the vortex, there were transparent and distorted maggots squirming about in the cluster. Jayam Sparrow. The young man calmly read out a name. All the items around him floated up, but there was no wind in the room. Klein pressed his top hat and revealed his human face. "How may I address you?" The young man nodded slightly and said, "Bornova Gustav. 1275, a new journey, Bornova Gustav." Klein's gaze swept across the young man's face, landing on the floating items and the mannequin made from metallic components. The mannequins have a postmodern style. Some of the physical laws here seem to have changed a little. Klein nodded in thought. I want to take the mirror. He very honestly stated his request. Bornova's expression didn't change, as though he was just a puppet. You're a blessed of Evernight. I guess so, Klein said with a smile. Bornova nodded. Then take it away. He's of the impression that I'm asking for the spoils of war for the Church of Evernight. Klein didn't explain as he politely took off his hat and bowed slightly. Thank you very much. As he spoke, Klein's figure suddenly faded and vanished. He had only come in the form of a historical void projection. Following that, in the carriage where Icancer and the machinery hivemind member were, nothing happened. Of course, they were only situated in a historical scene, and the actual situation in the car had been covered up without their knowledge. On a carriage more than 10 kilometers away, a mirror suddenly appeared in Klein's hand. It was silver in color, and the patterns on its back were ancient and mysterious. On both sides was an eye-like ornament. Don't speak. Klein looked into the mirror and gave a simple instruction. Yes, Supreme Master. Silver words surfaced from the depths of the mirror. Klein immediately took out a pen and paper and used the magic mirror as a backing to write. He thought for a moment and wrote with a faint smile, Dear Mr. Azek, it seems like I haven't written to you for a long time, as I went to the forsaken land of the gods and had a wonderful journey. There are only two types of living creatures there. They are either living sentient creatures or monsters. Those sentient beings either bear a curse or have obvious physical mutations. They're even more tragic than I imagined. I tried helping them. This wasn't only for the ritual, for my anchors, or to satisfy my sympathetic heart. It holds meaning on its own. Putting aside the suffering, the situation in the forsaken land of the gods is completely different from the outside world. It's like an oil painting with a black theme. What's surprising is that artificial death can influence the undying creatures there. I was very confused back then, but today, I finally had a guess. I suspect that this is related to the river of eternal darkness, one of the 9 Sephiroth. This reminds me of Calderon City in the spirit world. I'm reminded of the golden phoenix accessory you mentioned before. Rumor has it that the phoenix ancestor death of the 4th epoch could use the river of eternal darkness to a certain extent. I wonder if you know anything about this. The war that lasted for more than a year has finally ended. The Evernight goddess clinched victory in the end, and the god of combat has perished. I believe that, with your level and status, you should know what this means. No matter what, the long-awaited peace has finally arrived. People are gradually returning to their normal lives. This is a scene that I like to see, but some wounds may never heal. I don't know if the apocalypse will arrive on time, and I don't know when you'll wake up. I can only hope that everything's heading in the right direction. Finally, let me mention something trivial. I've already advanced to Sequence 2 and am now a miracle invoker. This is both a curse and hope. I wish you well. Your eternal student, Klein Moretti. After he finished writing, Klein examined it carefully before folding the letter. He blew Azek's copper whistle and summoned the bone messenger. When the gigantic messenger emerged from the ground, its bones trembled as though it had sensed the aura of the great ruler above the spirit world. Klein chuckled softly and handed the letter to the messenger, whose number was unknown. He watched it clumsily bow before disintegrating into a fountain and burrowing into the ground. After doing this, Klein cast his gaze at the magic mirror on his thigh. Sensing his gaze, the aqueous light on the surface of the mirror rippled and produced silver words. Great Master, where are we going next? Where to next? Klein repeated the question inwardly. He really wanted to teleport to the main peak of the Hornisus mountain range and enter the ancient palace that bordered reality and Foggy Town. He wanted to see if he had the chance to take away the most useful card of blasphemy from the Antigonus family's half-fool. With his present strength being equivalent to half a sequence 1, this wasn't an impossible task. Back when Zaratul was a sequence 2, he had managed to obtain the main ingredient of Attendant of Mysteries from the half-fool. Of course, the premise was that the Evernight goddess maintained the suppression and seal of the Antigonus family's ancestor. Hence, he had gone full circle, circling back to a deal with the Evernight goddess. The present me is the owner of Sephra Castle. I can split a portion of the worms of spirit to stay above the gray fog, constantly responding to any prayers. This way, apart from having certain latent problems to my mental state, I'll gain quite a bit of benefits in other aspects. Yes, I can help my main body at any time, giving me another resurrection method. Even if my main body is completely destroyed, with the worms of spirit above the gray fog, I can still reassemble my will and body, however, if I were to walk in the real world and get concealed, and also end up having my connection with Sephra Castle severed. The worms of spirit left in Sephra Castle will lose control and turn into monsters, just like Zaratul from back then. Klein quickly analyzed the situation. With his current strength, he felt that it was best if he didn't venture deep into Calderon City for the time being. Even if he were to search for clues regarding the River of Eternal Darkness, he would have to fulfill many wishes and obtain the true strength of a miracle invoker. With this in mind, Klein patted the mirror and said with a smile, "Next, let's go wander together. Where do you want to go?" "Try or no, you can go wherever you want," Arrows replied humbly. Klein smiled and jumped off the carriage, heading towards the city closest to him. After the carriage continued for several meters, it disappeared inch by inch and returned to the fog of history. At the same time, Klein's trench coat turned into a black robe. His top hat changed in shape, giving off a classic vibe. This made Klein feel like a wandering magician walking through the streets and alleys, in a rather intact house in Backlund. Dressed in holy white robes, the beautiful demoness of unaging, Katerina, put down the mirror in her hand and turned her head to the young man who was rocking in a reclining chair. "The war is over. They finally decided to summon me back to headquarters. I've been waiting for this day for too long," the young man sitting on a reclining chair scoffed. He was wearing a long black robe with red patterns. He had a pale white brown-skinned face with a soft outline. He was the gatekeeper possessed by the red angel evil spirit. Katerina pressed down on the table with both hands and sat on it. The corners of her lips curled up as she said, "You don't seem testy at all. When you get locked underground with two detestable fellows for nearly 2,000 years without being able to escape, you'll know that 2 years of waiting is extremely easy and relaxing. I'm not in a rush at all," the red angel evil spirit said with a chuckle. "After this matter ends, I'll let you experience it. Of course, I'll remember to throw you 2 male companions. As for how long you can last, it's up to you to decide if you can hold yourself back." As he said this, the red angel evil spirit's 2 cheeks didn't reveal any retorting mouths. This was because, to them, this was the truth. They and 2 other detestable fellows had been locked underground for nearly 2,000 years without any means of escape. Upon hearing this answer, Katerina's eyes darted around as she asked with a faint smile, "Aren't you worried that Primordial would learn of this once you head to our headquarters?" "So what? There's always a need to take risks in doing things. Furthermore, the worst outcome is to fuse with her. I'm already 3 in 1, so becoming 4 in 1 isn't a problem," Sauron Einhorn Medici said with a nonchalant attitude. "Let's set off." Katerina hopped off the table with a smile. Just as she finished speaking, a red-haired man with a trademark imprint on his forehead was reflected in her eyes. The gatekeeper, who wore a black, red-patterned robe, stopped breathing. His skin and flesh rapidly rotted, turning into yellow-green pus. In just a few seconds, there was only a white skeleton and a Beyonder characteristic left on the reclining chair. Katerina waved her hand, pulling the Beyonder characteristic over by using invisible threads. It fell into her palm. Immediately after, she lost all corporealness and suddenly entered the mirror she had used before. A dark and illusory path that appeared surreal presented itself in front of the Saintess of White. It formed a complicated and mysterious web with similar objects in her surroundings, interweaving into a strange world that was different from reality. Katerina quickly traversed the mirror world and approached the target node. At that moment, she felt a powerful suction force. She couldn't help but deviate from the path and cast a dark and blurry fog. It represented a mirror in the real world. In an instant, Katerina, along with the red angel evil spirit, left the mirror and came to an unfamiliar room covered in carpets. At the edge of the room, a young man with ordinary facial features who was dressed in common clothes leaned against the staircase railings and smiled at the demoness of white. His left hand was constantly tossing an item, a strange crown covered in rust and blood. Before Katerina could react, the young man took out a crystal monocle and put it on his left eye. Heh! The red angel evil spirit's sneer echoed in Katerina's mind. The next second, the young man took off the monocle and shifted it to his right eye before saying with a smile, "Sorry, I wore it in the wrong spot." Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com. 1276 Wandering Magician. Upon seeing this scene, Katerina's body took a step back uncontrollably as her mind fell silent. 2 seconds later, she opened her mouth and let out a male voice. "Hey, little raven." Without waiting for the young man to respond, Katerina smiled and said, "Aren't you looking down on me by bringing just a few avatars? Could it be that you're a mailman, specifically here to deliver me Beyonder ingredients? Tell me, what kind of cooperation do you want? I don't hate you too much. After all, what happened back then was planned by that zealot. The mastermind was Alice the Tutor, and you can only be considered an accomplice." The man opposite him caught the crown that was covered in rust and blood. He straightened up and shook his head with a smile. "I have my reservations in cooperating with you after hearing your voice. Why don't you get Sauron and Einhorn to talk to me?" "Tusk, Tusk. It's been so many years, yet you're still as willful as a child. Do you still remember who was responsible for carrying you when you were still a baby? Who was the one who burned away your hair?" The red angel evil spirit mocked without any compromises. The young man opposite him used his empty hand to straighten his monocle and calmly turned around before walking out the door without any hesitation. During this process, he sighed softly, "Childish." Seeing that Ammon had no intention of stopping, the red angel fell silent for a few seconds. Before the other party walked out of the room, it controlled Katerina's body and chuckled. "Don't think that I don't know what you want to do, but it doesn't matter. Since you don't have the same thoughts as that zealot, then there's room for cooperation." Ammon stopped and turned halfway to look at Demoness of White Katerina, who was possessed by the red angel evil spirit. The monocle on his right eye seemed to glimmer slightly. Awa County, in a city that was being rebuilt after war, inside a bar which had burn marks. "Toby, did you add too much damned water to your beer?" A man wearing an old cap took the cup and took a sip. He couldn't help but complain. The boss, who doubled up as bartender, wiped his cup and snorted. "Do you still remember the alcohol ban from before? Alec, you should be thankful that you even have alcohol to drink." The burly man, who was named Alec, murmured a few words before he focused on drinking his beer. Beside him was a bronze-skinned man with rolled-up sleeves. He looked up and surveyed the area. "I heard that the alcohol ban will soon be lifted because Fainapotter's food will soon be sent over. Also, Faceak and Intis will pay reparations with plenty of food." "I can only say that I hope so. May the Lord watch over us." The bar owner, Toby, had just responded when he heard the door open. He looked up and saw a young man who seemed to be a wandering magician walk in. This man was wearing a long black robe and a classic top hat. He walked to the bar counter and sat on a high stool. A cup of Southville beer. The man placed several copper pence on the counter. The burly man named Alec turned his head to look at the stranger and asked curiously, "Not from around here? A magician?" The young man, who didn't have any outstanding features, laughed and said, "Yes, the magic that I'm best at is to satisfy the wishes of people." Alec immediately whistled. "What did I hear? To satisfy the wishes of people? Lord, there's a fellow pretending to be a deity here." This teasing caused everyone to burst into laughter. The young man who claimed to be a magician wasn't angry. He smiled and said, "That's just a special magic trick." Alec gulped down a mouthful of bland beer and laughed. "Then fulfill my wish and let this stingy boss treat me to a glass of beer." "All right." The young man in a black robe raised his right hand and tapped lightly on the table. With the glass slamming onto the counter loudly, the bar owner poured a glass of beer and pushed it in front of Alec. Then he retracted his hand and repeated his glass wiping. This scene that seemed familiar to him stunned Alec. He shouted blankly, "Toby, you know him?" "No." The boss, Toby, glanced at Alec like he was a fool. Alec raised the glass of beer with uncertainty and took a careful sip to see if Toby would make him pay for it. Seeing that the bar owner no longer bothered with him, the burly man turned his head in surprise and looked at the young man in a black robe and a tall hat. "How did you do it?" "I told you that it's a special magic trick." The young man leisurely drank a mouthful of Southville beer. While Alec remained in shock, the man beside him with rolled-up sleeves sneered, "I dare bet that you and Toby must have colluded beforehand. Your knocking on the table is to say that you'll pay for the beer." "You can make another wish," the wandering magician replied nonchalantly. "My brother and I have a house that collapsed during one of the bombings and is being rebuilt. My wish is that it will return to its original state before I return," the man with his sleeves rolled up said smugly. This wasn't an easy task. The wandering magician raised his right hand and snapped his fingers before smiling. "All right, your wish has been granted." The people who were paying attention to this broke out into laughter. They no longer paid attention to the foreigner and his clumsy magic show. After drinking, the man with his sleeves rolled up left the bar in a drunken stupor with Alec and staggered down the street towards the suburbs. 15 minutes later, they returned to the area where they were rebuilding their home. They were about to enter the tent that was issued by the government. At this moment, a gust of cold wind blew and made them shudder at the same time. Soon after, a 2-story building appeared before their eyes. It was a house that they were very familiar with and had spent years building. Alec and his brother subconsciously turned their heads and saw the same confusion in each other's eyes. "I didn't drink that much. That damn Toby mixed so much water into the beer," Alec murmured, as if he was seeing things thanks to his intoxication. His brother didn't respond. After being stunned for a few seconds, he suddenly widened his stride and rushed to the house, touching the wall and the door. "It's real, it's real," he kept muttering to himself as if he had gone crazy. Alec did the same thing. Finally, he confirmed that their house had been restored to its original state. This made him both surprised and scared. At this moment, his brother suddenly said, "My wish was granted. That magician, that magician." Before he finished his sentence, he turned around and ran towards the bar. Alec came to his senses and followed closely behind. Bang! They pushed open the bar's door and rushed in, casting their gaze at the bar counter. However, the black-robed and tall hat-wearing wandering magician had already left. Alec and his brother looked around. They appeared relieved, but they also felt like they had lost something. In the square of the city, the young wandering magician was squatting in front of a 10-year-old girl. "My magic is to fulfill your wish." He turned his head and glanced at the nearby Evernight Cathedral. The little girl had run out from the Evernight Mass, seemingly preferring the empty square. After some thought, she looked at the gentle Mr. Magician and said, "My wish is for my father, uncle, and brother to come back to life. I don't want their bereavement money." The wandering magician didn't respond as he gazed deeply at the little girl in front of him. The girl pursed her lips and forced a smile. "I was just joking. Mommy said that such a wish is not something even the deities can grant." As she spoke, she lowered her head and looked at her toes. "I just want Daddy to hug me again." Before she could finish speaking, she suddenly realized that there was a shadow in front of her. She quickly raised her head and looked to the side. Standing there was a lone soldier dressed in a red shirt and white pants. He didn't hold a rifle and was wearing a hearty smile on his face. He crouched down and spread open his arms like always. "Daddy," the little girl pounced forward and threw herself into the warm embrace. "I miss you so much." At that moment, the young magician pressed down his hat, straightened himself, and walked towards the entrance of the square. Amidst the night breeze, his long black robe swayed gently in the vast plaza. In a blink of an eye, it was Monday. In the ancient palace above the gray fog, the members of the Tarot Club appeared simultaneously and greeted Mr. Fool in unison. Klein looked around and suddenly felt emotional. The Hanged Man is currently a cardinal of the Church of Storms, and he's in charge of the Rorstad Archipelago Diocese. Although Justice has temporarily lost contact with the psychology alchemists, she has the right to become one of their counselors. The Sun is an elder of the 6-member council in the City of Silver, and the Moon is a sanguine earl. The Star is a high-ranking deacon of the Church of Evernight's Nighthawks. The Hermit is a hidden queen at sea, one of the 10 pillars of the Moses ascetic order. Apart from the Magician and Judgment, the other members of the Tarot Club are all demigods. They are the upper echelons of different factions in the mysterious world. And with the support of the Abraham family, the Magician has a high chance of advancing to sequence 4 secret sorcerer within the year. In other words, Judgment is the one who has the hardest time improving her strength. She is only one of the mid to upper echelons in Me9, so it's extremely difficult for her to become a demigod. Klein, who was shrouded in grayish-white fog, quickly retracted his gaze and laughed self-deprecatingly in his heart. "It's finally like a high-end secret organization, however. It always gave me the feeling that this is some conference between the various factions." He then nodded at the Tarot Club members and said, "Let's begin." 1277. A qualitative change. Upon hearing Mr. Fool's words, Alger's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly felt the feeling he had when praying to the Lord of Storms on Pasu Island. When he greeted the Fool, he didn't notice any changes in him. Everything seemed to be the same as before, but at that moment, he believed that Mr. Fool was different from before. This was something at the spiritual level, one that Alger wasn't able to describe accurately with words. He only felt that the body that was enveloped by the grayish-white fog contained a terror that was tens of thousands of times more terrifying than before. A simple sentence or simple action could suppress a person's natural order. Mr. Fool has awoken further. After the world went to the forsaken land of the gods and brought out the City of Silver, Mr. Fool went one step further in his awakening. He already has the level of a sequence 0. If it wasn't for the fact that the sailor pathway is sensitive to the level of a high-ranking person, I wouldn't have even noticed it. Alger wanted to say something, but he forgot what he was about to say. Leonard surveyed the area and saw the other members remain silent. He probed. According to the information we have gathered, there was indeed a battle of gods. The participants that have been confirmed to appear high above Backland include the Evernight Goddess, God of Combat, and Earth Mother. As for the outcome, I believe everyone knows it very well. What are your thoughts on this? During the tarot gathering last week, Leonard had already mentioned the corresponding matter, and had taken the initiative to ask Mr. Fool what had happened. Unfortunately, Mr. Fool only told him that he was recently paying attention to the forsaken land of the gods and didn't give a direct answer. I can't understand why such an outcome would occur. Earth Mother and the god of combat should have collectively defeated the Evernight goddess as a mother-son duo. Catlia didn't conceal her puzzlement. Alger retracted his thoughts and said after some deliberation, I received a report. Just as the war ended, Phaenopotter changed sides. This means, Audrey vaguely grasped something. At that moment, Derek mimicked the lady across him and raised his arm. I roughly know why. You. Emlyn uttered a voice of distrust. After all, the son had previously been isolated in the forsaken land of the gods, so his understanding of the outside world was all thanks to the other members of the Tarot Club. How could he know more about the details of the battle of gods than everyone present? Alger, who knew that the son had always been honest, suppressed his curiosity and excitement from the bottom of his heart as he asked in a deep voice, Why? Derek looked around and calmly said, You have to promise with Mr. Fool as a witness that you can't reveal what I'm about to tell you. No problem, Catlia took the lead. After everyone made a promise to the Fool, Derek nodded. Earth Mother isn't the giant queen, Umbella. The real Umbella has long died. Her remains are in the City of Silver. This news was like a bomb that landed in the hearts of all the members. It created a massive upheaval that threatened to destroy their minds. For a moment, Alger, Audrey, and company were unable to say a word. It was as though they had been struck by lightning. They were paralyzed in their positions like stone statues. After a while, Leonard asked in disbelief, Are you sure? As soon as he said that, he began regretting his question. Since the City of Silver had the remains of the giant queen, Umbella, it meant that the whole matter was highly credible. Subconsciously, Audrey, Fours, and Zio cast their gazes at the figure at the end of the long, mottled table. They discovered that there was a smile in Mr. Fool's eyes as he maintained his sitting posture without any changes. This indirectly means that he is in agreement with the information that little son just provided. Before Audrey answered the son's question, she nodded indiscernibly and said, This can explain many things, but if Earth Mother isn't the giant queen, then why would Angel of Fate Ouroboros believe that she is Umbella? Oh, why does the god of combat want to work with her? Who is she? Upon hearing Miss Justice's series of questions, Alger suddenly felt a little emotional. The topic of discussion amongst the Tarot Club had finally raised from kings of angels to true deities. Previously, although they had stopped the descent of evil gods and had communicated knowledge of secret histories, they had rarely directly discussed the true deities. This was a subconscious fear, a deep mark left in them due to their upbringing in the present world. And now, the members of the Tarot Club had unknowingly lost the reverence that came from the depths of their souls. Catlia didn't notice this as she focused on Miss Justice's questions. She said thoughtfully, Perhaps that Earth Mother has always been disguising herself as Umbella. This has managed to fool the Angel of Fate as well as the god of combat. How is that possible? Zio instinctively muttered. Force took a deep breath and said, What a horror story. At that moment, the world, who had been silent all this time, said, Nothing is impossible. What if this cover-up had the assistance of the Evernight goddess and other true deities? A conspiracy that lasted for 2,000 to 3,000 years. Alger's eyes froze as he instinctively shrank back. He had an instinctual fear of the Evernight goddess and Earth Mother that stemmed from his soul. The Tarot Club members fell silent once again until Leonard repeated Miss Justice's final question. Who exactly is Earth Mother? As he spoke, he looked at the world, Klein Moretti, and attempted to get an answer from his former colleague. At this moment, they heard a long-awaited knock. It was Mr. Fool knocking on the table. Audrey and company perked up as they turned to the end of the long bronze table, waiting respectfully for Mr. Fool's answer. The fool Klein chuckled and said, "I can give you some hints." He looked around and continued, "Why does the Church of Earth Mother like to turn the sanguine into believers? The Earth and Moon are two neighboring pathways. Legend has it that during the Second Epoch, the ancient god Lilith, who represented the Moon, died because of the giant king's betrayal. She occasionally responds to the sanguine's prayers as though she hasn't completely perished." After the four prompts, all the Tarot Club members, including the Moon Lin, thought of an answer. Earth Mother's true identity is sanguine ancestor Lilith. Lin's eyes widened as he instinctively sat up straight. His mind was a mess as all sorts of ideas ran through it. Leonard was first astonished before he muttered in thought. A few days ago, the Church of Evernight stopped promoting the title of Lady of Crimson and changed the prayer sign from the crimson moon to that of stars. As a high-ranking Nighthawk deacon, he was qualified to read the corresponding documents. The Evernight goddess used the authority of the moon domain as a bargaining chip. Catlia said, the conclusion that lingered in everyone's hearts. At this moment, they no longer had any doubts about the true identity of Earth Mother. "Thank you for your hints." Audrey immediately bowed to Mr. Fool. After the others expressed their gratitude, they looked at the Moon Lin, who was still looking stupefied. "Mother Goddess is the ancestor. The ancestor is Mother Goddess. So I've never changed my faith. It's no wonder I still continue going to the Harvest Church even without Father's corresponding psychological cues. That's because my intuition told me that the Mother Goddess is the ancestor. Therefore, the ancestor has favored me and made me the savior of the sanguine." Thoughts flashed through Lin's mind as he found a reasonable explanation for the guilt he had previously felt. He began to believe that he was the most devoted sanguine. Glancing at the Earl, Force smiled with interest. "Mr. Moon, perhaps you might become the Archbishop of the Church of Earth Mother after some time. No, it should be the sole sanguine representative of the Church of the Earth Mother." This writer immediately came up with a nickname. "Why?" Lin asked in puzzlement. He believed that the ancestor would allow the sanguine to maintain their former state and not merge with the Church of Earth Mother directly. Leonard smiled and said, "Since the Evernight goddess doesn't have the title of Lady of Crimson, Earth Mother will soon have a similar honorific name. It's impossible to fool the other churches." Lin roughly understood what the upper echelons of the Church of Evernight were thinking. He nodded slightly and began imagining a series of scenes. His kinsmen, who had previously mocked him for believing in Earth Mother, would queue up in front of him and accept his baptism. With this in mind, Lin's mood turned extremely happy as he couldn't help but raise his chin. After the exchange, the members of the Tarot Club fell silent for a moment, not knowing what to say. A few seconds later, Alger broke the silence and calmly said, "Most of our members are demigods, so the time it will take to advance will lengthen. Furthermore, we have our own factions. We might need a few years before having a single chance of obtaining Beyonder characteristics, potion formulas, and sealed artifacts. The focus of the gathering now might switch to exchanging information and engaging in secret cooperation." Audrey, Catlia, Leonard, and company nodded in agreement. At this moment, the fool Klein surveyed the area and chuckled. "With the matter regarding the forsaken land of the gods over, my condition has recovered quite a bit. You can exchange items of higher levels from me." He pretended to be calm as he revealed the truth that he was recovering. This was an answer that every member of the Tarot Club had long guessed. Just as Audrey and company were guessing which level Mr. Fool had awakened to, Klein smiled and added, "Those items of higher levels include the sea god's identity, level, and strength. 1278 reminder sea god's identity, level, and strength." Hearing Mr. Fool's example, Alger's mind went blank for nearly 2 seconds. This was something that he had never dreamed of. From his point of view, By obtaining the authority of sea god through Jam and Sparrow and replacing Calvatua, Mr. Fool had obtained a stable and large number of believers. This was a crucial step for his recovery. Therefore, this secret existence definitely wouldn't give up on the corresponding identity. To his surprise at that moment, he actually heard Mr. Fool inform everyone that the sea god's identity, level, and strength could be exchanged. After further recovery, Mr. Fool no longer needs the identity of an entity at the level of sea god, as well as the corresponding believers. This is the performance of a great existence. Something that isn't qualified is only used temporarily, never monopolized. Alger first sighed inwardly before feeling excited. He felt that Mr. Fool's words were directed at him. In the Church of Storms, he had relied on external forces to become a Sequence 4 demigod. Although he barely managed to rise up to the brass, it was almost impossible for him to advance any further. As for the theft of the Book of Calamity, he couldn't see any hopes of doing so at the moment. Therefore, Alger could only temporarily suppress his ambition and patiently wait for the opportunity to arrive. Now the opportunity was here. And it came fast. Alger was currently a cardinal of the Church of the Lord of Storms in charge of the Rorstad archipelago. Once he secretly became sea god and controlled the authority of those waters, he would become the king of the Rorstad archipelago, a true king. With this in mind, Alger nearly couldn't contain himself. It took him a great deal of difficulty to calm himself down. Although Audrey, Derek, and company couldn't hide their shock that the Tarot Club was beginning to trade the identity, level, and strength of a deity, even if it was only a false god, they didn't have any intentions of switching to the storm pathway. Compared to Alger, they weren't that excited. They quickly controlled themselves and cast their gazes at Mr. Hanged Man. Alger took a deep breath and humbly said to the end of the long bronze table, "Honorable Mr. Fool, what price is needed to exchange for these items?" The fool Klein was waiting for the Hanged Man's question, and said with a smile, "The missions I shall give you, as well as frequent praying and the sincere making of wishes." What he wanted to emphasize were the words towards the end of the sentence, but he believed that the members of the Tarot Club wouldn't be able to tell. As for how he could complete the corresponding wishes, he currently had two methods. First, he used the other Beyonder powers he possessed to achieve the corresponding effects. For example, he could summon historical scenes and repeat the segment of gifting beer to fulfill the wish of the bar owner treating the patron. Second, he could directly grant a relatively low-level wish with his accumulated power of wishes and create a true miracle. For example, using a snap to cause the collapsed house to instantly return to its original state, succeeding in rebuilding it in the full spirit of the wish. In addition, Klein could use Sephra Castle's level and powers above the gray fog that was equivalent to a king of angels who had yet to accommodate a uniqueness. In other words, when he responded to prayers, he could use the core powers of a Sequence 1, which was also the core power of the Attendant of Mysteries. After this period of experimentation, Klein had a rough idea of the two effects. The first was to create a nascent divine kingdom, and the second was grafting. The term grafting was coined by Klein himself. After all, he wasn't a real attendant of mysteries, nor did he obtain the corresponding mysticism knowledge. This ability could allow an object that couldn't be directly connected under normal circumstances to achieve an inconceivable effect by grafting. A simple example was to mix the concept of the beginning and the end of a path into one common node, making it impossible for anyone who walked that path to leave. To Beyonders, there were quite a number of powers that could do something like that, but an attendant of mysteries, grafting, directly acted on a concept itself. Not only was it at a very high level, like the descent of a true deity, but its effects were bizarre and had a hint of concealment. In addition to the replication powers of the Grade 0 sealed artifact, the Staff of the Stars, Klein could completely respond to prayers like a king of angels while inside Sephra Castle. Furthermore, he could do more things. Upon hearing Mr. Fool mention missions, Alger suddenly recalled something. He hurriedly lowered his head and asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, do you still need me to carry out further investigations regarding the 3 targets of the Fasak Empire that participated in the Konotop Sea battle?" He had previously obtained information regarding the 3 suspected owners of Creeping Hunger, but he hadn't found anything abnormal. The fool Klein nodded slightly and said, "There's no need for that anymore." He originally wanted to use this clue to grab the tail of the Twilight Hermit Order, but since Adam had likely become a god, it was better to avoid doing so. Respecting a Sequence 0 true deity was Klein's usual principle. He had to compromise and give up if necessary. Without waiting for Alger to speak again, the fool Klein said in a relaxed tone, "Your current mission is to cooperate with the Sea God believers and settle down the people who have left the forsaken land of the gods." "Your wish is my will," Alger replied without hesitation. This made Derek silently heave a sigh of relief. He no longer had any doubts, hesitations, or worries about the subsequent developments. He had full trust in Mr. Hanged Man's ability to handle matters. At this moment, the fool Klein looked around and smiled. Apart from the sea god's identity, level, and strength, there are many things that can be exchanged for. For example, the imperative mage potion formula and Beyonder characteristic. He didn't list down too many examples so as to prevent himself from damaging the fool's standing. As for having said so much, it could be explained away that Mr. Fool was in a good mood from having taken another step towards recovery. Moon City had been passed down the heritage of an imperative mage, something Klein could exchange for when granting them the wish of being saved. Of course, even if he directly made the residents of Moon City sacrifice the corresponding items, the people who had finally found his blessings and protection would definitely be very willing to do so. They were more afraid that Mr. Fool would abandon Moon City and not accept their sacrifice. Apart from that, Klein himself had a Silver Knight marionette, the Seer Pathways Sequence 9 to 3 Beyonder characteristics, the Sealed Artifact, General of the Pupilless Eye, a drop of the Primordial Moon's blessed blood, and various kinds of charms and bullets that came from Worms of Spirit. If the Wish Maker wanted a consumable or something for a temporary loan, Klein could even take out more from the historical void. The imperative Mage's Potion formula and Beyonder characteristic. Zio inexplicably felt that Mr. Fool was looking at her. To be frank, she lacked the motivation to advance. On the one hand, she was only one of the mid to high-ranking members of Me-9, so the chances of getting a ticket to the ranks of a demigod were very low. On the other hand, her father's reputation had been restored to a certain extent, so she had no pressing goals. At the same time, the war had ended. Her mother and brother had returned to Backlund and were about to start a normal life. With Zio's current overall income, it was enough to support a wealthy family. All of these reasons made Zio feel that her current life was pretty good, and she didn't really want to change it. Of course, if she had the chance to advance to the demigod level, she wouldn't let it go. Due to the war, she had experienced the helplessness of a Sequence 5. Furthermore, in the Tarot Club, aside from her and Fours, everyone else was a demigod. There was no doubt that she didn't want to fall behind that much. Amidst her thoughts, Zio looked at Fours before bowing her head to the entity at the end of the long mottled table to indicate that she would work hard. Fours could roughly guess her friend's attitude because it was roughly the same for her. If it wasn't because she needed to advance to Sequence 4 to effectively resist the full moon ravings, so as to stop troubling Mr. Fool, as well as the Abraham family having prepared the potion formula and beyonder ingredients for her. She wasn't in a rush to become a secret sorcerer. As a traveler, she could go wherever she wanted. She could immediately head to a location to eat whatever delicacy she wanted. It completely satisfied For's initial expectations of being a beyonder. Of course, she had another motivating factor to improve herself. After becoming a demigod, she could further help her teacher and family. Seeing the fog-covered Mr. Fool leaning back into his chair, Audrey didn't say another word. After some hesitation, she opened her mouth and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have a question. If there's a matter and you're aware that its outcome has nothing to do with you at all, with it solely being the result of the feelings and gambling of certain existences, what will you do?" Just as she said that, Alger laughed. "Everyone is destined to die. It's inevitable no matter how hard you try to change that. Then, does that mean one's life is meaningless?" He seemed to have long since thought of this problem before adding, "Since you can't change the outcome of the matter at the moment, then try your best to improve yourself, obtain more power and wield more authority until, one day, you can participate in the gambling. If you die during this process, it's better than not doing anything." That's the most sincere words Mr. Hanged Man has ever said. It seems to come from his heart. The insignificant can also become great. Audrey was touched and nodded indiscernibly. At this moment, the world jam and Sparrow looked around and spoke. "Everyone, I have something to remind you of." When the Tarot Club members looked over at the same time, Klein controlled the world and said in a deep voice, "The apocalypse will arrive in about a decade. There's a possibility for everyone to be destroyed, including the deities." 1279 Sense of Urgency Apocalypse. Although Audrey had long learned about the prophecy of the apocalypse from the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom demigod, she never found it corporeal enough, feeling that it was meant to deceive the people. Even though she had already slightly experienced a war where the individual was puny, she didn't believe that the world was just about a decade away from the apocalypse. There were no signs of this at all. However, the person who had given the apocalyptic prophecy was Mr. Fool's blessed, Mr. World, who had always been trustworthy and daring to strike at angels. Furthermore, his tone was firm, as though he had already seen what was about to happen a decade later. This made Audrey choose to instinctively believe him. Her heart sank as she felt nervous and flustered. Apart from that, she also felt her confusion fade significantly. There was still another decade before the end of the world. Even those who were drowning would struggle a little, much less a perfectly fine sequence for demigod. Apocalypse. As a cardinal of the Church of Storms, Alger had recently seen many apocalyptic prophecies, but those unverifiable matters couldn't compare to the world jam and Sparrow's abnormally serious warning. The impact brought by the two sources wasn't on the same level. At the same time, he acutely noticed a detail: the world said that even deities would be destroyed. Alger's first reaction was that Jam and Sparrow was being disrespectful to Mr. Fool, as Mr. Fool was also a deity. However, he quickly rejected this idea. After all, the world Jam and Sparrow was Mr. Fool's blessed and was the most devout believer. The other members of the Tarot Club might accidentally blaspheme Mr. Fool, but it was impossible for the world Jam and Sparrow. Due to the two prerequisites that Jam and Sparrow wouldn't be disrespectful to Mr. Fool, and him saying that even deities would be destroyed, Alger quickly came to another conclusion. In the world's Jam and Sparrow's heart, Mr. Fool's level was higher than that of a true deity. Alger never doubted the world Jam and Sparrow's knowledge. After all, he was a powerhouse who often interacted with angels. This knowledge made him both shocked and puzzled, momentarily unable to find an even more reasonable explanation. Having used the blood of a snake of fate to advance to the level of a demigod, Catlia would also occasionally dream of the scene of the dawn of the apocalypse thanks to her pathway having clairvoyant as its sequence 3. In addition, Queen Mystic Bernadette would occasionally remind her, so she didn't feel any surprise or shock regarding Mr. World's words. She just felt like the dust that had been stirred had finally landed on the ground. As for the future, this mysticologist was equally lost. Apart from improving herself, she didn't know where to direct her efforts. Apocalypse, Zio and Fors looked at each other across Ma'am Hermit and sensed the raging upheavals in each other's hearts. They had never thought that the wonderful life they were living wouldn't last more than 2 decades unless something happened. This was a time where they were in their prime. Even if they weren't demigods, they didn't have to worry about the inclination towards losing control due to their aging bodies. As the person who spoke was the world Jam and Sparrow, the two ladies didn't suspect the authenticity of the prophecy. They momentarily felt fearful and heavy. At the beginning, Derek couldn't help but feel depressed. This was because the city of Silver had just left the forsaken land of the gods and came to the world of light. Yet none of this would last long before the apocalypse was ushered in. Soon, he composed himself and chose to believe in Mr. Fool. Since this great existence was able to rescue the city of Silver from the forsaken land of the gods, he, too, could also stop the apocalypse. Although I'm the savior of the sanguine during the apocalypse, I never expected it to happen so soon. I'm only an Earl, Emlyn couldn't help but frown. It was as though a student who had just attended a few days of lessons had to suddenly sit an exam. Of course, this also made him excited. After all, it wouldn't be long before he would fulfill his mission and display his greatness in front of his fellow kinsmen. Leonard had heard of the doomsday prophecy from old man Pallas Zarost. Although he didn't know the reason behind such a development, he had long been mentally prepared. At this moment, he was the first to snap back to his senses and asked, "Why would the apocalypse suddenly happen? There are no signs of it." Klein controlled the world to reply, "It's just that you didn't notice the signs. Do you think that a battle of gods erupted for no reason?" Seeing that all the members of the Tarot Club were stunned and lost in thought, the world Jam and Sparrow added, "You aren't qualified to know the exact reason. Just understanding it would bring about an irrepressible corruption. Only angels and above can resist it. This is similar to what the demigod from the Church of Knowledge's demigod said. It's close to the corruption from the cosmos. I seem to have forgotten something. Mr. World seems to have figured out the whole story. Isn't he afraid of being corrupted? He's already an angel. He is now a he." Thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind as she acutely sensed that the world Jam and Sparrow might have completed his advancement and become a true mythical creature. In ancient times, this could even be called a subsidiary god, a member of the deity lineup. Right on the heels of that, Alger, Catlia, and the other members of the Tarot Club understood the truth. They knew that the world Jam and Sparrow had already reached the top of the real world, becoming an angel that walked the land. Their guesses were related to Jam and Sparrow's plan to deal with a mythical creature. Some believed that it was the benefits that Mr. Fool's recovery gave to his blessed. But no matter what, it was the first time the Tarot Club had a member at the level of an angel, aside from its host and convener. Of course, they weren't too surprised by the world Jam and Sparrow's advancement to Sequence 2. They had long been numb to his progression rate. Klein controlled the world and made him look around. "You can think about what you plan to do next and how you would go about doing it." Zio, Fors, and the other Tarot Club members nodded slightly as acknowledgement. Another 10 minutes of free exchange followed before this session of the tarot gathering gradually came to an end. After returning to the real world, Zio surveyed her bedroom. Her expression slowly turned solemn. She once again felt a pressing sense of urgency. After walking out of the room, Zio saw that Fors had also walked out to the corridor at the same time. She no longer suffered from momentary paralysis before coming out. "Where do you plan on going?" Both of them asked in unison before falling silent. A few seconds later, a handsome young man walked out of the guest room. He wore a pair of narrow-framed spectacles and had slightly fluffy hair. He held a few thick books in both hands. "Oh no, I forgot that I have classes this afternoon." The youth mumbled to himself as he rushed towards the staircase, completely ignoring the presence of the two ladies. He was Zio's younger brother, Rio Derecha. He had just entered a pre-law school. In Backlund, one had to pass a pre-law examination before becoming a paralegal. Such a paralegal had to study and work for at least 5 years under a full lawyer before one was allowed to take part in the qualification examination and get a license to practice law. If one wanted to become a senior lawyer, one had to enter the Backlund Lawyer School to receive university-level education. Zia watched her little brother run down the stairs, and a smile subconsciously appeared on her face. She immediately looked up and said to Fors, "I plan to return to Me9 and work hard." "I plan on making a trip to Teacher's Place," Fors answered the question. Right on the heels of that, the traveler's figure quickly turned transparent and vanished. A few seconds later, Fors appeared at a relatively intact building in the rebuilding Pritz Harbor. Then, she took out a pen and paper from her pocket and wrote a note. She planned on telling her teacher that she had finished digesting the traveler potion. Putting away the fountain pen, she stuffed the paper into the mailbox at the door. This wasn't Dorian Gray Abraham's residence. It was the place where Fors and the gentleman had previously agreed to send letters to. The next day, when Fors arrived, she saw Dorian providing her with the meeting location and time. Emlyn opened his eyes in his room and changed into his coat with a standing collar, intending to visit Marquis Nibs. When the carriage passed Rose Street, he subconsciously looked out the window and was somewhat surprised to discover that the door to the Harvest Church had opened. After a brief hesitation, he got the carriage driver to stop the carriage, and he paid for the ride. After putting on his top hat and holding his cane, the red-eyed sanguine Earl walked up the steps and entered the Harvest Church. He saw Father Utravsky, who seemed to have grown a little taller, cleaning the prayer hall with his back hunched. "He has been released as expected. It really was protective custody." Emlyn shook his head inwardly. At this moment, Father Utravsky raised his head and looked at him. "Wipe the candle stand." "I'm trying to please Mother Goddess," Emlyn mumbled. He walked to the room behind him, changed into the brown priest robe of the Church of Earth Mother, and began working. Neither of them spoke a word. They did their own jobs and tried their best to restore the Harvest Church to its former cleanliness and tranquility. After an unknown period of time, a group of people suddenly entered the door. Emlyn subconsciously looked over and saw Baron Cosme Odera. He saw Viscount Ernst Boyar, who had once worked at the Harvest Church, and many familiar faces. Emlyn's lips subconsciously curled up. 1280 chance meeting in the tiny city on a steam locomotive heading for Midshire's Constant City. Klein, who was dressed as a wandering magician, looked at the young man and his parents across the narrow table with items placed on it. "I have 2 types of magic tricks. The first is to let your wishes come true. The second is to use a mirror to answer your question. Of course, the first type of magic requires payment, and the second requires you to answer questions posed by the mirror. What kind of performance do you want to watch?" The young man had black hair and brown eyes. He seemed to have received a good education. He looked at his parents sitting beside him and said with a smile, "My wish is too difficult, so I won't trouble you. In comparison, I'm more curious about the mirror that can answer questions." Klein sighed as he shook his head. With a flip of his left hand, he revealed a silver mirror with a black gem on both sides. "It seems to be an antique." The young man opposite him commented with piqued interest before saying, "My question is, what is the purpose of my visit to Constant City?" A commonly seen smile, one which was often seen on the faces of street magicians, appeared on Klein's face as he stroked the surface of the mirror with his right hand and said in a serious tone, "Mirror, mirror, please tell me the answer to the question." After repeating it 3 times, he released his right hand and showed the surface of the mirror to the 3 passengers. There were a few silver words on it: "To get married." Amazing! The young man and his parents looked at each other in disbelief. After boarding the train, they had never mentioned anything related to the wedding, nor did they reveal anything that people could use to make the connection. This was the first time they had seen a magic trick that didn't rely on props or a fake audience. "All right, it's time for the mirror to ask." Klein smiled as he covered the surface of the mirror with his right hand. "All right." The young man replied, feeling intrigued. "Next, let's see what question the magic mirror will raise." Klein released his right hand in an exaggerated manner as though he was performing a formal magic trick. The silver words on the surface of the mirror had already changed, extending into a complete sentence. "You would prefer your bride to be a woman in her 40s or above, right?" The young man's expression froze for a moment before turning pale and then completely red. "How is that possible?" He immediately rebutted. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at his parents and grumble, "What kind of strange question is that?" "It's just kidding." Klein smiled apologetically as he hurriedly pressed his right hand onto the surface of the mirror as though he didn't know that would happen. Then he released his right hand. Indeed, the words on the mirror changed again. "How old are you?" 25 years old. The young man replied carefully, afraid that he would fall into a trap. He felt the gazes of his parents and the surrounding passengers on him change. "All right, that's the end of the magic performance." Klein smiled as he put away the mirror. "You can try another magic trick." Just as he finished speaking, the steam locomotive whistled. This was the sign that it was about to enter the station. "Sorry, that's my call." Klein took out his golden pocket watch and checked the time. He carried his luggage and left the steam locomotive along with a group of passengers. He arrived at the station platform that had yet to be lit up with the gas lamps. This was Midseyshires Beltane City, a city that had both prospered and declined due to the coal mines. To Klein, the greatest significance of this place was that it was a strategic node in the previous World War. Faceak had taken 3 routes in its invasion. One attacked the border along the Amantha mountain range to break through the land defenses. Another involved setting off from Sonia Island, attacking the coastal harbors, and attempting a landing. The third was to follow the main railway as they marched towards Backland for the invasion. Among them, due to the existence of the Church of Storms and the combined might of the ironclad warships and high-level arbiters, the naval forces of Faceak and Fainapotter failed to obtain the results they expected. They even failed to obtain naval superiority. And on the battlefields on the Amantha mountain range, the headquarters of the Church of Evernight blocked one wave after another. It didn't fall throughout the war, thus preventing Winter County and East Chester County from going through the fiery crucible of war. Of the 3 routes, the only successful one was the Midseyshire troops. They did a joint naval land operation and conquered Lone's second biggest city, Constant City, the capital of Midseyshire. Then they made their way southeast, rendezvousing with the Intis troops in the greater area of Backland. Klein acted as a wandering magician. On the one hand, he had to accumulate wishes, display miracles, digest the potion, and increase his strength. On the other hand, he was planning on taking the path of the war, using his eyes, ears, and his soul to truly see the damage brought about by war. After knowing the secrets of the cosmos and the underground, he could understand the Evernight goddess's plan and accept it to a certain extent. However, this didn't mean that he was indifferent to the sacrifices. At the same time, he confirmed one thing: even if he didn't stop George Roman III from becoming the Black Emperor, the World War would have still erupted. However, Lone would have had the upper hand. The Evernight goddess and her allies would face the god of combat head-on, forcing him to seek help from Earth Mother. When that happened, the number of battles between the gods, the intensity and scale would far surpass what had transpired. Due to this reason, Klein followed Fasek's invasion path and wandered forward. After leaving the station that still had traces of gunpowder, he carried the worn suitcase with a set of clothes and made his way towards the area where hotels were located. At night, he would stroll along the streets and alleys of the city and perform wishing magic for everyone. After taking a few steps forward, Klein's spiritual perception stirred as he cast his gaze to the end of the street. There was a black-haired woman wearing a simple linen robe and a tree bark belt with no socks or shoes. Ariana, the leader of the Church of Evernight Ascetics, the grounded angel Ariana. Why would she be here in Beltane? Shouldn't she have returned to the Evernight cloister at the Cathedral of Serenity, or be sent to the Fasek capital, sent Milam to preside over the handing over of the god of combat's estate? It isn't a simple matter if a grounded angel were to suddenly appear in such a small city. Klein was puzzled as he frowned slightly. He hesitated for a moment before deciding to ask. This wasn't because he was a busybody. If anything happened while they were in the same city, no one could escape. However, at this moment, Ariana had already vanished from the crowd. As a servant of concealment, Klein couldn't track her down even if he wanted to. Similarly, when it came to the matter of concealment, Arrows was helpless. Klein slowly took a deep breath and turned to enter the hotel in thought. He got a room and stowed his luggage away. Then he maintained his attire as a wandering magician and brought Arrows along with him. Following his spiritual intuition as a seer, he walked all the way to the municipal square of Beltane City. Erected near the municipal hall was a notice board that had many notices pasted over it. Klein saw that several people surrounded it. There seemed to be a brand new notice, so he approached them and stood in the periphery of the crowd, looking at the wooden signboard. In the middle of the signboard, a slightly yellowed piece of paper covered over the other notices. On the surface were black ink and Lonese writing. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am your new consul. Now I will issue 3 new laws. First law, without my permission, no living being can leave this place. Second law, all life is equal in front of the law. Even ordinary people can kill angels. Third law, those who commit the crimes mentioned below will be punished severely, the highest penalty being the death sentence. 1 murder, 2 theft, 3 chanting the complete honorific name of a deity, 4 offering sacrifices to evil deities, 5 fraud, 6 leaking secrets." An announcement like this, Klein pricked up his brows when he saw this. Without using his spiritual intuition, he could sense that there was something wrong with the content. He instinctively tried to make his spirit body return to Sephra Castle. But an invisible force blocked his departure, making it impossible for him to make contact with the grayish-white fog. Klein narrowed his eyes as he took a few steps back to distance himself from the crowd. From his point of view, an abnormality of this level had reached a near-deity level. He had previously been in situations of not being able to return to Sephra Castle, but the reason was that he didn't have the time to take 4 steps counterclockwise, recite the incantations, or he had been obstructed and interfered by himself. There was only one instance when he failed to leave the real world due to external forces. It was a powerful seal personally created by the Evernight goddess in the foggy town. Apart from that instance, even blasphemer Ammon couldn't do such a thing. Of course, at that time, Ammon's main goal was to force Klein to stir Sephra Castle before he seized the opportunity to use a loophole to replace him as the great ruler above the spirit world. Otherwise, this angel of time could have used his ability to steal Klein's thoughts to stop him from returning. Who is this new consul of Beltane City? Is this the reason Ma'am Ariana came here? As his thoughts raced, Klein made the magic mirror slip from his wide sleeve into his left hand. What happened? Klein asked softly. The aqueous light on the silver mirror's surface shook wildly as slightly pale silver words appeared. A few rules here have been replaced. As for who did it, there's no way of knowing. Great Master, you can try finding the servant of concealment, Ariana, to learn the truth from her. Are you satisfied with my answer? The rules have been replaced. Lawyer, arbiter, or a bug, Klein thought as he looked around. He realized that the citizens in the square were puzzled, perplexed as to why the new notice would mention angels. Why did they have to request permission to leave? The war had already ended.